Hey everyone, this is Nanagon coming at you with another section of stuff that I want to talk about. This up here is PHP tips for those who want to be tipped. There's been a lot of lessons that I've learned as a developer over the years that I've been programming, especially in PHP. And I wanted to start off with one big one that I keep running into with new developers. It's get your ifs right, and don't forget to subscribe because that's what all the cool kids are doing. So when you do an if statement, usually you do some kind of a conditional, and you use a double equal or a triple equal. There's a big difference between a double equal and a triple equal. So the double equal is inclusive, and it really tries to find any reason that it can be true or false. It's called being truthy. You could have a 1 is truthy because 1 is not 0 and 0 does not evaluate, or 0 evaluates to false. It could also be -1. It could be duck. It could be lizard. It could be mountain or -500 million. It could be a float. It could be so many things could evaluate to a double equal. But a triple equal is very, very specific. It's a type exclusive comparison. So what this means is if you have some variable and you do a triple equal on it, it means that that variable has to be whatever the other side of the equation is. So if var triple equal and then 0 as an int, if that equals 0 and it's an int, then it will get in the if statement. It's very specific, and I've realized over the years that using triple equals pays more than doing a double equals. Double equals will get you in trouble, and random bugs will happen because a value that you weren't expecting suddenly showed up in your if statement and ruined some stuff. But if you have a triple equal, then you're going to program in a way where you know exactly what's going to get in that if statement. So let's see some examples here. Here's a common if example. If var, which happens all the time, then we have our imaginary database connection here, and it's, select whatever from table where ID is var. And so there's a lot of here. So here it comes back to that truthy thing. So anything that kind of evaluates to truthy would get in this if statement. So duck -1, a huge number, it's a float. SQL injection could get in here. If you did a literal Boolean true, it would go in there. A space would go in there. Because all the above are true, you could have something that's like ID equals space. And you can imagine that that's not what you would expect. And in some cases, if your table isn't properly indexed based on whatever ID you're querying on, if it somehow evaluates to an empty var, for instance, if it's this literal Boolean true will evaluate to nothing, and nothing will evaluate to, it's just ID equals quote, which is empty, which then it will scan your entire index for empty, which is not very efficient. So one other thing is, okay, so what happens if you don't get inside this if statement now? You have this result equals something. Well, what if down here you have for each result, blah, 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 do something down here? Well, that's not going to be helpful anymore. It's going to probably error out or give you a notice or a warning or something like that, and it will cause bugs down the road. So can you guys understand a little bit about how terrible this is? And here's a link to kind of more about comparison operators and what those entail. So then I've seen this where it's like, oh, sweet, now I have not empty. This is great. Now I'm totally covered. It's still not that great. It's a little better because it will check that a variable is set and that it has a value, but it will still pull in values like duck, -1, and SQL injection. So it's better, but it's definitely not the best. So remember, with the goal that you have in mind with every if statement, there's a purpose behind why you have an if statement. It's running so it can do something. Well, what do you want it to do? In this case, the primary goal is you need it to be an int, because you want it to hit this ID field, and your ID field is an int, so at the very least, make this an int. And then your secondary goal is you want a result back so you can do something with a result, whether that's out down here or whether it's a little bit later or whatever. That's the secondary goal, but the primary goal is this guy right here needs to be an int. So in order for us to do this, these are the best if examples. And you're probably looking at this and going like, oh my gosh, that's so much more code, but I'll get into that in a second. So you start off, you could force your var to be an int by doing this int val function. Then another thing that you should do is, because you could think of it like the scope of your if statement is only within these curly braces. So because result can be out of the scope, you need to define it first. So define it as an empty array. So let's say that it doesn't come in here. You still have an empty array by this line right here, and you can still do your for each and it won't blow up, or whatever you're expecting it to do. But if you don't define this, let's say it doesn't come in here, then it's going to say for each result, or some function result, and it's going to be null, and it's going to go, I don't know what to do with null, and it's going to error out and be gross and yucky. So now we have our int. We're making sure that it's a positive integer because it can evaluate to -1 and still be true. So now it's int and it's greater than 0. So now I know that it's a greater than 0 number. It's going to be hopping in here. And technically you don't need the quotes anymore. And I mentioned it right here, but as a side, don't ever write SQL like this. Always use prepared statements. Please, 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 please. Use, like, if this is MySQL, use the question mark placeholder or a named placeholder. Don't ever write stuff like this. This is just ripe for SQL injection. Thank goodness, though, that we're forcing it to be a var so SQL injection wouldn't get in here, but just get out of the habit of doing this. It's gross. So anyway, we now know we have a positive integer. We have a result, so that by the time we hit this down here, it's going to be what we expect it to be, or at least it's going to be an empty array. So then I also defined down here option 2, and you'll notice I did the triple equals just because there's a small performance gain when you do that. So C-type digit is making sure that that var is a digit and it's greater than 0, and then you could still do the code there. So you can see the benefits of this is none of these will work anymore, and you're not going to have unexpected behavior because you know what's going to happen. And because that result's defined, which causes a lot of bugs when it's not defined, you're going to save yourself a lot of headache down the road. And yes, there's more code, but it's really important to remember that you're going to probably spend more time debugging this down the road than if you just properly coded it and spend an extra minute or two. Like, look what I did. Maybe this would take a minute or two to get in there. So all in all, it's a lot better, makes you feel more warm and fuzzy, and it's not going to take that much extra time, and it's going to save you down the road quite a bit. So that's your lesson for the day. Hopefully it was nice and quick and short, so thank you. Just don't forget to subscribe because I like subscribers, and it helps motivate me to do more videos and all that fun stuff.